Something changed in the skies over the Middle East recently, and almost nobody noticed when it happened. Not because it was hidden poorly, because it was hidden brilliantly. No press conference, no satellite images released to the public, no diplomatic statement. Just a quiet technical activation inside a building that the outside world had been told was a telecommunications office, and a shift in the electronic warfare balance of an entire region that military planners in Washington, Tel Aviv, London, and Tokyo are now scrambling to fully understand. Russia turned on a radar inside Iran, a specific radar, one that was built for a specific purpose, and that purpose, stated plainly, is to find aircraft that are not supposed to be findable. If you fly an F-35, or you live in a country whose national defense depends on F-35s being survivable in contested airspace, what happened in that building in northeastern Iran is not a footnote, it is the story. And here is why. What the building actually is. The city of Mashhad sits in Iran's northeast, close to the borders with Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, far from the coastlines and choke points that dominate most coverage of this conflict. It is not a city that appears frequently in Western reporting about the war, which is precisely why it was chosen. There is a building in Mashhad whose exterior signage identifies it as a regional branch of a Russian telecommunications infrastructure company. The company's contracts with the Iranian government are on record: civilian broadband development, network infrastructure, the kind of unglamorous technical work that generates no attention from intelligence analysts focused on missile sites and naval deployments. The building is not a telecommunications office. It is the forward operations center for a Russian military technical team that has been deployed to Iran for 18 months. The most carefully concealed foreign military presence in this theater since the conflict began. The team is not large. It does not need to be, because the system it is operating does not require a regiment. It requires expertise, precision equipment, a power supply, and a secure, encrypted data link to processing facilities elsewhere. At 2:51 in the morning, an activation signal went out from that building, and what it activated after 18 months of installation, calibration, and preparation was a ground-based variant of the system Russian aerospace engineers called Belka. The stealth hunter was now online. What Belka actually does and why it matters. The name means squirrel in Russian. It's an odd name for one of the most strategically significant radar systems deployed anywhere in the world in the past decade. Russian military engineers have a tradition of giving their most serious systems disarmingly ordinary names. Do not be misled by it. To understand what Belka actually does, you first have to understand what stealth actually is, because most popular explanations get this wrong, and getting it wrong leads to completely misunderstanding why this deployment changes anything. Stealth aircraft are not invisible to radar. They never were. What stealth does is reduce the radar cross-section of an aircraft, the amount of radar energy it reflects back to a receiver, to a level so small that conventional radar systems cannot build a reliable track, cannot follow the aircraft with enough precision for enough time to guide a missile to intercept. Against the centimeter wave radar frequencies that most modern air defense systems use, the F-35's combination of geometric shaping, radar-absorbent surface materials, and carefully managed electronic emissions makes it extraordinarily difficult to engage. Not impossible in theory, but practically very hard. The word conventional in that explanation is doing enormous work. Belka is not conventional. It operates across a combination of very high-frequency and ultra-high-frequency radar bands, longer wavelengths that interact with the F-35's carefully engineered geometry in fundamentally different ways than centimeter wave radar does. At lower frequencies, the shaping solutions that give the aircraft its low radar cross-section become less effective. The aircraft does not become visible exactly, but it becomes detectable. Detectable with enough consistency to build a partial track, and a partial track handed off at the right moment to a terminal engagement system using infrared or electro-optical guidance can be enough. This is not a new theoretical concept. In March 1999, Serbian air defenses shot down an American F-117 Nighthawk over Yugoslavia, the first confirmed combat loss of a stealth aircraft in history. The Serbs did not have advanced technology. They had an older Soviet radar system operating in the VHF band, a skilled operator who understood the physics, and the patience to wait for the right geometry. The F-117 was lost because the American assumption of invisibility had a boundary that the adversary understood, and the operator did not. Belka is what you get when a major military power with serious electronic warfare expertise spends 20 years refining that exact approach with modern processing capability, modern antenna arrays, and a secure encrypted data link to processing facilities elsewhere. At 2:51 in the morning, an activation signal went out from that building, and what it activated after 18 months of installation, calibration, and preparation was a ground-based variant of the system Russian aerospace engineers called Belka. The stealth hunter was now online. Why Iran and why now? Geography is strategy. The decision to deploy Belka to Iran rather than operating it from Russian territory is not a logistical convenience. It is a deliberate operational choice that tells you exactly what the system is intended to do. Iran's airspace is where Israeli F-35 Adir aircraft have been conducting strike operations throughout this conflict. The flight corridors, the ingress routes, the timing patterns. Israeli mission planners have been threading their aircraft through Iranian air defenses repeatedly, and the operational concept underlying every one of those missions rested on a specific assumption that Israeli stealth provided a survivability margin sufficient to make the missions viable. That assumption was built on an assessment of Iranian air defense capabilities. Iranian air defense capabilities did not include a Russian next-generation radar operated by Russian crews specifically engineered to detect fifth-generation aircraft positioned on Iranian soil with direct access to the airspace those aircraft operate in. It does now. From Mashhad, the Belka's coverage arc reaches across significant portions of the airspace relevant to both Israeli strike operations against Iranian targets and American operational patterns throughout the broader theater. The deployment location was selected with care. It puts the system where it generates the most useful data on the specific aircraft, conducting the specific operations that both Russia and Iran have the strongest interest in understanding. Understanding is the first step. What comes after understanding is the question that matters. The kill chain nobody is talking about. Here is the scenario that keeps American and Israeli air warfare planners awake at night. Belka on its own cannot shoot down an F-35. It's a radar system. It detects, it tracks, it generates data. By itself, detection is not destruction. But modern air defense works in a layered system, sensors feeding data to processors, processors generating targeting solutions queuing engagement systems, completing the kill. The question is never whether a single component can complete the kill chain alone. The question is whether the components networked together can complete it collectively. If Belka generates a track on an F-35, even a partial track, even intermittent contact, and that track is transmitted in real time to Iranian air defense batteries operating infrared-guided or electro-optically guided surface-to-air missiles, the geometry of the engagement changes fundamentally. The Iranian battery does not need to find the aircraft with its own radar. It needs to know roughly where to point its infrared seeker. Belka tells it where to point. This is called sensor fusion. It is the defining feature of modern integrated air defense, and it is the capability that makes Belka's presence in Iran something categorically different from simply adding another radar to Iranian inventory. There is a further layer. Chinese satellite intelligence collection over the Middle Eastern theater has been documented by Western analysts throughout this conflict. Chinese imaging and signals intelligence satellites pass over the region on schedules that American and Israeli mission planners must factor into operational timing.
If Chinese overhead collection is providing position data that feeds into the same integrated picture that Belka contributes to, the detection architecture facing F-35 operators in this theater is not one system, it is three. Russian radar, Chinese satellites, Iranian terminal engagement networked into something that none of them could accomplish independently. The whole is considerably more dangerous than the sum of its parts. What this means for Israel? Israel's exposure to this development is the most immediate of any country currently operating F-35s. The Israeli Air Force's F-35 Adir fleet has been the primary instrument of Israeli power projection against Iranian targets throughout this conflict. Strike missions that would have been impossible or prohibitively dangerous for older aircraft were made viable by the Adir's stealth profile. Israeli defense planners approved those missions based on a risk calculus that incorporated the best available assessment of Iranian air
defense capability. That calculus needs to be revised, not because Israeli F-35s are suddenly unable to operate in Iranian airspace. The aircraft retains substantial advantages: electronic warfare systems, speed, altitude performance, pilot training that no single radar deployment neutralizes. But the margin of survivability that mission planners calculated when they approved those strike profiles is narrower today than it was before Bielka went active. In military aviation, margin is not an abstract concept. Margin is the difference between a mission that returns and a mission that does not. When the margin narrows, even if it does not disappear entirely, the risk calculus changes. The missions that were clearly viable become marginal. The missions that were marginal become ones that require a different approach, a different aircraft.